when the narcissist sees you doing better without them. And I want you to really sit with what that moment actually looks like, because it does not look the way most people expect it to. It does not come with an apology. It does not come with a sudden, genuine reckoning where they finally see what they did and what they lost. It comes with something far more calculated, far more disorienting, and in many ways, far more dangerous than anything they did while you were still together. Because a narcissist watching you heal, watching you glow, watching you quietly build a life that looks nothing like the diminished, exhausted version of yourself they left behind, that is not a narcissist having a moment of remorse. That is a narcissist having a moment of threat response. And the difference between those two things will determine everything about what happens next, and more importantly, everything about how prepared you are to handle it. So stay with me, because this episode is going to walk you through exactly what is happening inside them when they see you thriving, exactly what they are going to do about it, and exactly why understanding this at a psychological level might be the most important form of protection you can give yourself right now. Let us start with the psychology of why your healing bothers them at all. Because on the surface, it should not make sense. The narcissist left or pushed you out or made the relationship so unbearable that leaving felt like the only option left. Either way, the ending was on their terms or felt like it was or was rewritten in their mind until it was. So why logically would your happiness after their exit be something they cannot tolerate? The answer lives in something called narcissistic supply. And once you understand it, everything about their behavior before, during, and after the relationship starts making a different kind of sense. Narcissistic supply is essentially the fuel a narcissist runs on: attention, admiration, emotional reactions, the confirmation that they matter, that they have impact, that other people are affected by their presence or their absence. It does not particularly matter to them whether that supply is positive or negative. Adoration works, but so does devastation. A person crying over them, unable to function, publicly struggling in the aftermath of their departure. That is supply. It is proof of impact. It is the narcissist looking at the wreckage of your emotional state and reading it as evidence of their own significance. Your pain, as cruel as this is to understand, was never just collateral damage to them. On some level, it was confirmation. So when that confirmation stops, when instead of seeing you fall apart, they start seeing you stand up, when the social media posts shift from absence to presence, when the mutual friends start reporting back that you seem different, lighter, more yourself than you have been in years. What the narcissist experiences is not happiness for you. It is not even indifference. What they experience is a specific destabilizing kind of threat that strikes directly at the most fragile part of their psychological architecture. The part that absolutely requires evidence that they are the most important variable in any equation they have ever been part of. Your thriving without them does not just suggest they were not necessary. It suggests they were the problem. And a narcissist cannot metabolize that conclusion. It does not fit inside the self-narrative they have spent their entire life constructing and defending. So instead of metabolizing it, they do what narcissists always do when reality presents them with something that contradicts their self-image. They move to neutralize it quickly, strategically, and with a precision that will genuinely catch you off guard if you are not watching for it. The first move is almost always re-entry. And this is the part I need you to hear clearly, because the timing of it is not an accident, and it is not a coincidence. The narcissist does not come back when you are at your lowest. They come back when you are at your highest or close to it, because your lowest was never a threat to them. Your lowest was supply. It is your highest that requires intervention. So the re-entry comes exactly when you have started sleeping properly again, when you have started laughing without it feeling like a betrayal of your own grief, when you have started making plans that do not involve them, building things that do not include them, becoming someone who is visibly, undeniably doing better without them in the picture. That is when the text arrives. That is when the mutual friend suddenly mentions they have been asking about you. That is when they like something you posted after 6 months of silence. Not because it was a particularly good post, but because you looked happy in it. And happiness in you is information that requires a response. The timing is so consistent across so many different narcissistic relationships that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is not romantic. It is regulatory. They are not coming back because they miss you. They are coming back because you stopped being something they could define. And that loss of narrative control is the one thing a narcissist cannot comfortably sit with for long. Now, here is where it gets psychologically layered in a way that catches even the most self-aware people completely off guard, because the re-entry does not announce itself as what it is. It never arrives labeled as being here because your happiness threatened my ego, and I need to re-establish some form of control over your emotional state. It arrives dressed in something that feels almost unbearably familiar, almost unbearably welcome, especially if you loved them deeply. And especially if part of you, even now, even after everything, still carries some version of the hope that they could be different. It arrives as the version of you fell in love with. The attentive one, the charming one, the one who made you feel like the most interesting person in any room you shared. This is what is known as hoovering, named after the vacuum, because the intention is to suck you back in, and it is not a conscious performance in the theatrical sense. The narcissist is not sitting somewhere rehearsing lines. This reversion to the love-bombing version of themselves is almost instinctive, a pattern so deeply embedded in how they navigate the world that it activates automatically whenever a source of supply needs to be recaptured. And it works with devastating frequency, not because the people it works on are naive or weak, but because the version being presented is real enough. It contains real memories, real moments, real chemistry that genuinely existed. The narcissist is not entirely acting. They are selectively presenting. And the difference between those two things is almost impossible to feel from the inside of the experience. This is also the moment where something very specific happens to you psychologically, something that nobody prepares you for, and that can make you feel like you are losing your mind a little because you have done the work. You have had the conversations with yourself, maybe with a therapist, maybe with people in your life who watched what that relationship did to you. You know what they are. You know the pattern. You can name the cycle, the love bombing, the devaluing, the discarding, and now the hoovering. You can name it clearly and accurately in your own head. You feel it anyway. The pull, the softening, the part of you that starts constructing reasons why this time might be different. Why the version of them that just reached out seems more genuine than the one that left. Why all the psychological knowledge in the world suddenly feels slightly less convincing than the warmth of a single message that sounds like the person you first fell in love with. This is not stupidity. This is not weakness. This is trauma bonding, doing exactly what trauma bonding does. Operating below the level of logic, below the level of rational understanding, at the level of the nervous system where the connection was originally formed and where the pull back toward it lives. In a place that words and awareness can reach but cannot always override. Because the narcissist did not just leave an impression on your memories, they left an impression on your nervous system. The unpredictability of the relationship, the cycling between warmth and withdrawal, between closeness and cruelty, between being chosen and being discarded, created a neurological pattern that psychologists compare to intermittent reinforcement. The same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Your brain was trained to seek the reward in the cycle. Keep reaching for the warmth after the cold, to keep believing the good phase would last this time, to interpret the very pain of the relationship as evidence that something meaningful was happening. So when they reappear offering warmth, something in your brain lights up in a way that has nothing to do with whether this is wise and everything to do with a pattern that was wired in before you had the information to resist it. Understanding that does not make the pull disappear, but it does do something important. It makes the pull explainable. And when something is explainable, it becomes, if not controllable, at least navigable. Because you can start to separate what your nervous system is responding to from what your healed self actually wants. And that separation, that small but crucial gap between the old pull and the new awareness, is exactly where your power in this moment lives. And what you do with that power, and what the narcissist does when the hoovering does not immediately work, and what the most dangerous phase of all of this actually looks like, That is exactly where we are going next. That gap, that small but crucial space between the old pull and the new awareness, is not comfortable to live in. Nobody tells you that part. Everyone talks about healing like it is a destination you arrive at and then stay in. Like one day you simply wake up and the pull is gone and the clarity is permanent and the narcissist name in your phone no longer does anything to your nervous system. That is not how this works. Healing from a narcissistic relationship is not a straight line you walk and then you are done. It is a practice you maintain daily, sometimes hourly, in exactly the moments when it is hardest to maintain it. And the moment the narcissist reappears, smelling like everything you loved before everything went wrong, is the single hardest moment that practice will ever be asked to hold. Because now it is not theoretical. Now it is not a conversation with a therapist about patterns and cycles and self-worth. Now it is a real message on a real screen from a real person whose voice you still hear in your own head sometimes, and your body is responding to it before your brain has finished reading the words. That is the moment your healing is tested in the only way that actually counts. Not in the absence of the thing that hurt you, but in its presence. So what do you actually do in that moment? Not what should you do in theory, not what the psychologically correct answer is in the abstract, but what do you do when the pull is real and the awareness is real and both of them are happening at the same time in the same body and you have to make a decision that your future self is going to have to live with? The first thing, and this sounds almost too simple to be useful, but it is the most important thing, is to slow down. Not because slowing down makes the decision for you, but because the narcissist re-entry is almost always engineered, consciously or not, to create urgency. The message has an emotional charge to it. It implies something time-sensitive, something that requires a response now, something that will close if you do not reach back immediately. That urgency is not accidental. Urgency bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term thinking and pattern recognition, and activates the limbic system, the part responsible for emotional response and survival instinct. In simpler terms, urgency makes you react instead of respond. And a narcissist who has spent years learning exactly which emotional frequencies you are tuned to knows, even if not consciously, that urgency is the fastest way to get a reaction before your awareness catches up with your nervous system. So you slow down. You do not respond in the first hour. You do not respond in the first day if you can help it. You give your prefrontal cortex time to catch up with your limbic system. And then you make a decision from the part of you that can actually see the whole picture, not just the part that remembers how good the good was. Now, let us talk about what happens when the hoovering does not work, because this is the phase most people are not warned about, and the one that genuinely catches people off guard, especially people who have done enough healing to hold the boundary the first time around. Because when the warm re-entry does not produce the desired result, when you do not respond the way they expected, when you are civil but not open, when you are composed in a way that does not give them the emotional reaction they came back for, the narcissist shifts. And the shift is not gradual. It does not ease in slowly with warning signs you can prepare for. It moves quickly, and it moves in the exact opposite direction from where they just were. The warmth that arrived first, the nostalgia and the charm, and the selective memory of only the good things gets replaced with something colder and considerably more pointed. What comes next is usually one of three things, and sometimes all three in rotation. First, sudden indifference, the performance of not caring that is so exaggerated it communicates the opposite of what it intends. The conspicuous moving on, the very public new relationship or situationship that appears with suspicious speed and is displayed with suspicious enthusiasm. This is not them healing. This is them constructing an audience for your reaction. They want you to see it. They want you to feel something about it, because feeling something about it means they still have access to your emotional state, which is all they were really after in the first place. Second comes the narrative shift. This is the one that tends to do the most lasting damage, especially to people who still have shared social circles with the narcissist. Because when their return did not produce what they needed, when you did not fold back into the version of yourself they could manage and define, they begin revising the story of what happened between you. Suddenly, the version of events that circulates is one where they left for reasons that cast you in a difficult light, where your healing is reframed as coldness, where your boundaries are described as aggression, where the person who spent the relationship absorbing their behavior is somehow, in the retelling, the one who made things difficult. This is not random cruelty, though it is cruel. It is a very specific psychological function. They are rebuilding the narrative around you because the sight of you thriving without them is a story that does not work for the self-image they need to maintain. A healthy, glowing, visibly better version of you is a walking rebuttal to everything they told themselves and everyone else about why the relationship ended. And a narcissist will not allow a rebuttal to stand unchallenged. So they challenge it the only way available to them, by trying to change what other people see when they look at you. Third, and often the most disorienting, is the intermittent reappearance. Not a full return, not a clear goodbye, but a pattern of occasional contact designed to keep you in a state of low-grade uncertainty. A message that seems almost accidental. A reaction to something you posted that could mean nothing or could mean something and is impossible to read clearly. A mention through a mutual friend that seems too deliberate to be casual. These small signals are not the narcissist being confused about what they want. They are the narcissist maintaining a threat of access to your emotional state without committing to anything that would require them to be accountable for the re-entry. It is, in every sense, having it both ways. The supply of your attention and the freedom of their distance. The particular cruelty of it is that it is just ambiguous enough to keep the door open in your mind without ever walking through it themselves. Which means you are the one doing the emotional labor of the uncertainty again while they pay no cost for creating it again. The pattern is identical to what happened inside the relationship. It has simply found a new form now that you are outside of it. So here is what all of this is actually telling you underneath the tactics and the psychology and the specific mechanisms of how it plays out. The narcissist seeing you doing better without them and responding the way we have described is not evidence that you still matter to them in the way you want it to matter. It is not love misfiring. It is not someone who hurt you finally waking up to what they lost. It is a system responding to a disruption. You were a source of something they needed, and you stopped being available, and the system is attempting to restore access. Understanding that fully, not just intellectually, but in the part of you that still sometimes wants a different explanation, is the thing that changes everything. Because once you see it as a system responding to disruption rather than a person responding to loss, the pull starts to mean something different. It stops being evidence that the connection was real enough to keep reaching for and starts being evidence that your healing has become visible enough to threaten something. And that, if you can get to the place where you feel it this way, is not a reason to go back. It is the most concrete, most validating proof available that going forward is working. Because here is the truth that this whole episode has been building toward. The narcissist seeing you doing better without them is not the danger. The danger is you seeing you doing better without them and not fully believing it yet. The danger is you standing in the most healed version of yourself you have inhabited in years, feeling the pull of something familiar and talking yourself into thinking that familiar means safe. It does not. Familiar when it comes to a narcissistic relationship usually just means practiced. You practice smallness. You practiced apologizing for things that were never your fault. You practice making yourself easier to be around by making yourself less than what you actually were. And you got very good at all of it. And none of it was ever love. When the familiar comes back, dressed as love, as nostalgia, as the person you first fell for, before the pattern revealed itself, your job is not to be cold, not to be angry, not to perform a healing you have not fully arrived at yet. Your job is simply to remember what the quiet feels like now. The quiet of your own apartment, your own decisions, your own nervous system, no longer braced for the next shift in someone else's mood. Remember what that quiet actually cost you to earn. And then ask yourself honestly whether anything being offered is worth giving it back, because you already know the answer. You have known it for a while now. You just needed someone to say it out loud clearly enough that the part of you still holding on could finally fully let go.